Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Bodine. I'm with the Colorado Clinical Translational Sciences Institute, as well as our Spark Reach projects that we're going to hear about today. Welcome to our monthly Ask the Expert interview series. We're really happy to have you here today. And just a few little housekeeping tasks as we go. We do have a chat box available today. So if you think of a question that you would like Rick to respond to, please feel free to enter it and we'll weave that into our conversation and do our best to cover everything before we finish up today. So Dr. Richard Duke is our guest today, and we are going to be discussing how he's managed to tie it all together: inventor, biomedical researcher, executive, and serial entrepreneur. So lots and lots of roles and hats that Rick has worn over the years. And we're going to dive into that in just a minute. So before we get started, I'd like to ground this a little bit by sharing again Rick's bio sketch so that we'll all know where he came from. He has more than 20 years of experience in building, financing, and managing startup biotech companies based on inventions made in Colorado's nonprofit research institutions. He is currently the principal investigator and co-director of the Research Evaluation Commercialization Hub, or REACH, at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. He was the founder and chief scientific officer of the Colorado Institute for Drug, Device, and Diagnostic Development, CID4, and not only that, but he's a co-scientific founder and former CEO of Global Immune, and was involved in the formation and or management of 6 other enterprises that we'll hear a bit more about today as we talk. And then in addition to all of this entrepreneurial activity, he has more than 35 years of experience in biomedical research. He's a tenured faculty member in the Department of Medicine, Medical Oncology at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And he has provided independent third-party research analysis in the life sciences sector to Janus Capital and other venture capital firms. So that's a large resume, Rick.
Yeah,
welcome.
too large.
Welcome, and thanks for doing this with us today. And just to kind of get us started, I am truly curious about your path and how you've managed to succeed both as an academic and an entrepreneur. Why don't you just tell us a bit about your journey along the way?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. That obviously doesn't sound like the standard sort of pathway, and I can't really say it was totally planned. I became interested pretty early in my career about how you translated things, and that was 30 years ago or longer, before people maybe thought about that. And I think it's because I sort of trained in a clinical department, even though I was doing my graduate work. Immunology at the university on the 9th Avenue campus, at least, was kind of integrated with clinical immunology. So there was a little bit more practical thought about, applying your research to something that was clinically relevant. And I think probably what sold me on that initially is that I had a friend who was the one of the 2 portfolio managers at Janus Capital, which was a very large mutual fund company at the time, and they needed people with basic science background, actually, to look at biotech companies that were emerging at that point in time. And this was early in the development of the biotech industry, and so as a result, there were companies being formed all over the place that were little more than ideas on a piece of paper. And so they hired me to look at those companies and provide them with feedback on whether I thought there was technology there that was going to be valuable. And almost all the time, I would get them to sell whatever they were invested in. And that was because the science, in fact, wasn't there. It was kind of an idea for science, but it was so early, and there weren't very many biotech companies at the time. So I began to realize that we couldn't really start to translate things in the university. That they wanted me to come to Janus Capital full time. That was probably an error. When I go back, you always have pivot points in your life that you probably could have done better. But nonetheless, I kind of sat with him as he was actually starting a new mutual fund company, and he said, "Why don't you come and join us?" And you can look at casinos and hotels and a bunch of other stuff. And I said, no, I got into this to cure things. And I think that was kind of a moment there of the cure things part. And then I began to realize I couldn't cure anything in Janus Capital, and I certainly couldn't cure anything in the university. And looking at all these companies that we had reviewed, I realized the only way we were going to do this was we had to raise capital, and you had to get, the only way to raise capital was to have a company. So I went back over to the university kind of with a new sort of look at how I did my research. And a second sort of fortuitous thing had happened. The department I was actually in, which was microbiology and immunology, ceased to exist, and immunology split off and microbiology was separate. I was the only immunologist on the campus, actually. And so I didn't have a department, didn't have a mailbox, and moved into the cancer center actually is to start the tumor immunology program. And that again was kind of fortuitous because I was able to interact with a lot of people that again were interested in doing something that was clinically oriented. And while it was a tumor immunology program, in fact, it was actually more geared towards development of vaccines. And at the time, HIV was a really big deal. And so we interacted on a lot of HIV vaccines with a variety of companies and with a variety of investigators. And as a result, I had a lot of people that I interacted with, and we did a lot of collaborative kind of stuff. It was an incredibly productive period for me, certainly. And noticed that, there were some things that were ready to go into people, we thought. And so we naively ran off to the tech transfer office, there wasn't actually an office on the 9th Avenue campus. It was only up in Boulder. And, said we wanted to start a company. And we're pretty much rebuffed at that point in time. The tech transfer office wasn't particularly friendly towards inventors. They more or less wanted to try to license things out. And as a result, we had 3 ideas, all of which were based on pretty high level publications, cover of Nature, PNAS, cover of Nature Medicine. So we had a bunch of really good articles on 3 different kind of topics. One of them was a molecule to prevent transplant rejection. The university licensed that kind of out from under us to Novartis, which was a blessing and a curse. Unfortunately, Novartis, we learned the one thing you have to watch out as an inventor is that your technology doesn't go to a company that really isn't interested in developing your technology, but merely sees it as a threat. And unfortunately, Novartis made a lot of money selling cyclosporin that people had to take for the rest of their life to prevent transplant rejection. And we had a molecule that potentially would eliminate the need for taking cyclosporin. That wasn't a very good business plan for them.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of it's something you learn. I know that Mike Hollers has learned the same thing with his company, Intelligent. As much as you think that isn't going to happen, it does. We were excited about Novartis doing that because we felt like it was, a great company, and we'd learned a bunch of stuff. And other than a couple of really spectacular dinners in the Novartis company lunchroom in Basel, not much else happened there. They really they actually killed the molecule at the end of the day. And that was the same kind of interaction we had. We were going to use it to prevent islet rejection. And so we thought Novo Nordisk would be a similar company. And there's a company that's been making money on insulin for 30 years. They aren't interested in it either.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of one of those things. So we were able to take some of the Novartis money and spin out a company called Global-Immune. And with a vaccine platform technology for immunotherapeutic uses, and tried to fund it on our own. The NIH was actually going to run a trial for us of an HIV vaccine, actually. And we thought that was good. It would give us some data in humans. And then unfortunately, the NIH process went a little slower than we can stand. So we realized we had to raise money. And then what we found was the venture capital guys weren't particularly interested in HIV vaccines because everybody thought it was impossible. And so far that's probably proven correct. We don't have an HIV vaccine. So that was probably right, but they were very interested in cancer vaccines. So we kind of came sort of full circle and repositioned the company for cancer vaccines. Hired a CEO. I have lessons about that one if we have time.
Sure.
And then hired an initial CEO, which was the wrong guy. It took me a couple months to figure it out. But then hired another guy who was able to raise an A round very quickly of about $8 million. We were able to move into laboratory space in Bioscience 1, built a clean room facility. I acted as president of the company for a few more years after that, helped the company raise about $80 million total while I was there at least. As president, it wasn't a lot of fun. It was a good learning experience because I was in charge of everything basically.
Yep.
The CEO got to go raise money. I got to stay back and make sure everything operated properly. So we grew pretty quickly to about 30 employees. I acted as the president and the CFO and ran all the accounting and all the audits and all the other stuff. So it was a good learning experience for me in hiring. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I went back in the lab at Global Immune, invented the hepatitis C product that almost got approved. It was very close, but we unfortunately got beat by a blockbuster drug. But then realized that I wasn't able to do anything more at Global Immune. The biology was going to go where it was us. The company eventually did go on to raise $225 million, I think, and went public and got acquired. But I had left many years before all that took place and started another company, and then also started CID4 at the same time. So how did I survive as a faculty during all of that?
Yeah, I'm curious.
That was mostly because I was very honest with everybody as to what I was doing. And so when because of the company, I had to be 50% at the company. I was 50% at the company and 50% of the university actually until 2009. And even though my lab had moved out, it was kind of an interesting thing that happened. It was when it was in the process of the university moving. I was able to move my lab out. So I still had a lab and I still had the company, but I was able to put the company and the lab together essentially adjacent to one another. Mm-hmm. And so when I was supposed to move back to the university, I didn't. And by then I was just immersed in biotech and I was immersed in spinning out companies out of the university. And so it really was just by being honest with first off, I was in Department of Medicine, and as a PhD in the Department of Medicine, as long as they don't have to pay your salary, they're not really too concerned about where you are. So as I was paying my own salary, it wasn't a problem, but it was kind of important for me to stay at the university rather than leave completely. And I did enjoy working with faculty and helping them identify technology and spinning out companies. So that's kind of what I did, even though it wasn't an official role. That's what I did. And in 2009, I actually had to leave completely to 0% because I had started with the state of Colorado, our little institute called CID4, and its mission was pretty much the same as what I was doing, which was to help people spin out companies.
Interesting. So one of the things that I noticed in your bio, you mentioned that your startup companies, their biotech companies, are based on inventions that are made in Colorado's nonprofit research institutions. Talk a little bit about that. Why nonprofit, and what's the difference?
So the nonprofit research institutions really are just the universities, and as well as National Jewish, so Colorado School of Mines. So really it's faculty that have invented things and need to develop it further. And like I said, it's not, I think we're getting closer at the university to fully support development of a drug. And that's mostly my interest is drugs. But you still need a company in order to raise the capital that you're going to need if you're going to actually take the product in the clinic. So we just don't have access to that kind of capital. We don't have actually access to the development part that takes place. We can't do that. Now, the reality is we manufactured the Global Immune product for 3 phase 1 clinical trials in a clean room facility the size of a closet. that product could have been manufactured in any of the research labs at the university, as long as we could put a lock on the door. So, occasionally you can make things like that happen, but for most people, that's not going to work. Actually, you really do have to have a company, but it still would not have been very feasible in the university.
Interesting. So one thing that I have an inside track for those of you listening today, and that I had the opportunity to really look through a PowerPoint that Rick put together, and you distinguish very clearly between research and development. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the difference?
Sure. So, research is, first off, that's what we all do. That's what I still think I do. And it's mostly to come up with a hypothesis and then go after that hypothesis by doing a series of experiments that either confirm the hypothesis or lead to another experiment. And so it's very much an empirical process where the data that you get create the next experiment. And that's all pretty much funded by the NIH and then philanthropic organizations like the American Cancer Society, the NSF, et cetera. Once you transition that product to the point where you've identified it as a product for now going into development, everything changes. You no longer are able to do an experiment and then change the direction of where you're going. So product development is actually very linear. We sometimes describe the label and then work your way backwards. So in the case of a cancer drug, here's a drug, here's the drug sitting in a vial. It's going to be administered, either intravenously or orally to treat a certain kind of breast cancer. Let's just say triple negative breast cancer. It's a small molecule. Here's what it looks like. That's what you start with as your premise. You know what the small molecule is. You know what you think your target is going to be clinically for that. And then you work in basically a linear fashion towards that. So that means once you start your product development, you really can't go back and change the product at all. You can't reformulate it. You can't change it. You can't say, oh, we should have changed this methyl group to something else. You're pretty much locked in. At that point, your costs are pretty much fixed. You've got an awful lot into the product. And so it becomes a linear process. And that's a lot of fun at first, because you get to do your phase 1 clinical trial with the product. And that's an exciting moment when you inject somebody with a product for the first time, and it was something that you invented in your lab. But then after that, it becomes a very long process that requires huge amounts of capital and a company and a whole bunch of other stuff. Phase 1 we could probably handle on campus, maybe. That certainly would be a goal of mine if I was going to be around here for another 30 years. But that really is where the transition becomes. You can no longer be empirical in your response, and that's maybe good and bad. It's more cost effective, but sometimes people end up taking drugs further than they probably should have gone in the first place. So
interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah. So this to me seems like a really good time to talk about the Spark Reach program. So can you kind of tell everybody what that is and what would you like them to know and how can they get involved with Spark Reach?
Yeah, so Spark was started by Gali Belair and Cheatham Benham in the CU Innovations, and it was a program based on a program that exists at Stanford that was called Spark. And the idea behind that was to give people small amounts of funding to come up with proof of concept data for their idea, and at the same time provide them with mentors and advisors who could get them kind of thinking about their project as it related to eventually becoming a product. And so that's our program was started with that basis. It was actually built on a proof of concept program that had been existing at the university since 2000, really, that provided small amounts of money for people to do proof of concept, to get proof of concept data for their ideas. And that money came from the state of Colorado and was often matched somewhere within the university. But one complaint that the state had actually is that there wasn't much oversight. That was merely a grant program. And so we gave you money and said, go forth and do your thing. And then there was an expectation that you, the entrepreneur inventor, would figure out what to do with it next. And that's really hard when you don't know what you don't know, let alone when you think you know what you're supposed to do, but don't really even know how to go about doing that. So that really was the purpose of the Spark program, was to actually build in that mentorship and advising piece. With REACH, the NIH had already realized that this was a program that they needed as well, that they were spending lots of money funding basic research at all of the research institutions, all of which was important and all does, is critical to drug development. But the reality was they weren't turning very many things from the bench to the clinic within that sort of setting. That was a part they really felt like they needed to foster. And so the REACH hub, which REACH stands for Research Evaluation and Commercialization Hub, is basically what is funding the Spark program at the university. So again, it's to select projects that are close to being identified as or declared as a product, and then helping them, providing them with money to make sure they've got a data set that supports that. Sorry, that has a data set that would support that, and then provide them with mentors and advisors who will help them go to the next level.
How intensive is that program for faculty?
Not as intensive as we would like it to be.
Okay.
And that's what we're kind of working on a little bit more of. And so as a result of getting the REACH Hub, I'll tell you a model that we have been working on. As a result of getting the REACH Hub, we were assigned 3 coronavirus rapid coronavirus test technologies.
Oh, wow.
And with the understanding that all of the groups would have 12 weeks to actually get to proof of concept. And with that program, we were actually able to hire advisors who had experience developing diagnostics, both from the company side, but also from the regulatory side. And then finally, someone to actually kind of manage all of the process. And so that was a team of 5 people, myself included, these 3 other paid consultants, and then an entrepreneur in residence that the NIH gave us. And we met weekly with that group. So basically it was like doing lab report every week for 9 months. We just moved to every other week, but that was probably, if you're going to really do this, that's probably the way you would want to do it. And we are going to work on that a little bit better this time. Right at the moment, it's still a little too much of a grant program to me. We do need to build in a little bit more in terms of the advisory, mentoring, and team approach to these things. And that's just been a question of trying to get enough bandwidth for everybody.
Yeah. Now, let's say I'm a faculty member and I've got this great idea and I bring it to you and you say, yeah, this looks like it might make it to market. What percentage of products that we do you think actually can make it to market?
Yeah, so this is always the depressing part of everything. The numbers are pretty ugly. For an oncology product, it's about 1 in 18. So if you take 18 products into phase 1 clinical trial and say how many get approved at the end of the day, it's only 5%.
Yeah.
Some other areas are quite a bit higher, but they're also not very easily. Doing an oncology drug is relatively simple. Developing in others areas is a little more complicated, but ophthalmology was pretty high for a little while, maybe 20%, 1 in 5 products got in there, but they tend to be a little bit nichier and they tend to be also kind of device oriented. So it's not something you should think about going into this because, and I'm really happy that people are optimistic because, my drug will never be one of the 17 out of 18. It will only be the 1 out of 18. Yeah. And that's the kind of, you have to take that kind of approach because the odds are against this working. Okay. They are really against getting a drug approved. It's just, we've got very high bars right now. But it, it means it doesn't mean that yours isn't going to be the 1 in 18. So you have to kind of take that stance. But yeah, that's the problem with drugs.
Medical devices may be a little more successful, huh?
Medical devices can be, but usually their product life isn't very long. So they tend to get, unless you invent the Da Vinci robot or something where you can add on a whole bunch of parts to it, and then have a long patent on the actual underlying technology. For most of the medical device world is mostly, get it to market and hold on to the market as long as you can before somebody comes up with an improvement to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very, very different for devices and diagnostics than it is for drugs, where you can get replaced quickly. A drug is not going to get replaced very quickly.
I've never thought of it that way. That's really interesting. I have to remember that. So if somebody has an idea, that someone listening today, and they want to get involved maybe with Spark or Reach, what's the first step? What should they do?
First stop is to go to CU Innovations. Okay, so the Reach program is its administrative home is CU Innovations. My administrative home is not CU Innovations, but the CU Innovations people really are the ones that manage this process from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And that's a now large organization as compared to when I started, and I told you there was no office on the campus. It's now a very good organization that has the ability to kind of help you determine whether you have something or not. And then if you do have something, they are willing to file an invention disclosure, have you file an invention disclosure around that. And then that turns into and then that will turn in hopefully into a patent. And then you're kind of in their system at that point. So not everyone that is in their system, however, is going to be funded by the Spark program. Mm-hmm. And again, just remember Reach. I know we kind of caused some confusion about Spark and Reach.
I know, it's hard.
Reach is funding Spark. So we all of a sudden realized we had kind of branded Spark and we couldn't figure out how to brand Reach. The NIH wanted us to brand Reach, but at the end of the day, they call us Spark too. So we're going to stick probably with Colorado Spark. It's just easier to remember and it sounds better. But that doesn't mean you're there. What that means is you have filed an invention disclosure with the university. The university will do some market research on that to see if it's viable. And if they determine that it's viable, they will go ahead with a patent application. So at that point, you're kind of in their system, and they meet once a week to discuss their sort of portfolio of stuff and where things are. And then they can encourage people to apply to the Spark Reach program, or we have an open solicitation for the program, which is now open right now. I think the announcement should be out somewhere or the other. Probably, I think they're on the CU Innovations website, if nowhere else. And the application due date, I think, is the end of September. I can't quite remember.
Okay, excellent. So we have a question in the chat asking, are Reach and Spark looking for mentors, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, so we are constantly looking for mentors and advisors because we ask our mentors and advisors actually to be an external, they are the external reviewers for our program. We run things pretty much like the NIH does in terms of reviewing these grants. And what that means is no one from the internal program actually is involved in the review process. We kind of help guide it a little bit, and we do, kind of tell the reviewers more or less what we're kind of looking for, at least. But the reality is it's exactly like a study. We run it exactly like a study section. And at the end of the day, the reviewers determine what grants are going to actually get, what projects are actually going to get funded.
What are the range of dollar amounts for projects that are funded?
So our dollar amount right now is $200,000, and it's for a 12 to 24 month long period. Mm-hmm. The reality is that can go out to 3 years because 2/3 of the money actually comes from the state of Colorado, and 1/3 comes from the Reach program, from the Reach grant itself. Mm-hmm. So the state grants are always 3 years long. So the reality is it would be a 3 year, it ends up being a 3 year grant, even though the NIH thinks we only do 12 months.
Got it.
So,
So for this potential mentor, would this person reach out to you directly if they wanted to?
yep.
Do it? Okay.
Yep, that would be fine, or to Claire McDonald, who would be listed there, and then someone who will be named. We unfortunately lost my co-director on the CEO innovation side, just left, so we're in the process of hiring somebody for that position.
Yeah. So kind of along this similar vein, for faculty that really have this entrepreneurial bent and they want to start to follow this path, what would you tell them? What barriers did you experience? How did you manage it? What if I came to you and said, oh, Rick, I really want to do this, what would you tell me?
So I think it is critical. We're going to work on our educational programs a little bit more to try and give people a little bit of that kind of, here's a seminar you can go to. And we do run some seminars. The last Wednesday of every month, we do have sort of seminars that are geared towards topics, at least, that would be valuable to somebody thinking about being an entrepreneur. We also will be having a boot camp about things like this. But I think, again, going and speaking to the people at CU Innovations is actually critical to kind of plug into this thing. I started off with a pretty hostile relationship with the Tech Transfer Office, but over time, I was able to work with them and actually, almost became embedded with the iteration that came before CU Innovations. But that's where the real critical part starts. I'm welcome. My door was always open when I was at the university. Now I don't exactly have a door that I can open, but that'll change. But I'm always available, for people to talk to if they've got an idea and they want to start. I'm a very large proponent of the Small Business Innovative Research Grant Program. I actually am head of a study section with the NCI. And I work with the NCI in terms of their entrepreneurship program that they're trying to, again, try to evolve to build that program up quite a bit. So there's a lot of interest in that. It is, at the end of the day, a grant. Our faculty are good at grants. That's why they, are able to survive. And so, to me, the first step is really, if it's a drug technology, I don't think you have much choice. You've really got to go the SBIR route. It's not, you can't really I shy away from angel investors for a drug technology, just because the money that's going to be involved is just going to exceed whatever you can usually get from a group of angels. And that is not a fun thing to deal with when you actually have to go out and raise significant amount of capital. So yeah, they could start you a little bit, but I would not really recommend that route. I would recommend actually doing an SBIR or an STTR grant, actually, to start with your idea to see if it has any credibility. I know we've got a couple of people on the call that can talk about their recent getting these things funded and what an ordeal that has been. But at the end of the day, they now have enough capital. They have enough grant funding to get their product ready to go into the clinic. So to do all the necessary FDA studies and manufacturing process to actually get their product ready for the clinic. So that, to me, is the best way to go right at the moment. We're going to try to support that program a little bit better, as time goes by, and actually identify some physical space for our SBIR spinouts.
Oh, that's very exciting. And speaking up from the med tech kind of side of things, I also like the SBIR program a lot, and the STTR can be really useful.
Yes.
On both sides, it's worth considering. So we have another question, and the question is, how was your experience being a CEO or president considered or valued in the tenure process? How did you balance that?
So I was tenured in 1998, just before I left. So my tenure was traditional tenure. I was a course director for 3 years. I taught both in the graduate school, immunology as a course director, and then in medical school as a co-course director. So I had the educational component and I had the research component. So I was a traditional route. After that, I would have to admit, I think in terms of post-tenure review, however, which I go through every 5 years and have been going through forever, it seems like, I think being in the Department of Medicine actually, again, was a big advantage for me, because they don't, like I said, out of sight, out of mind. I mean, I don't think anybody ever thought I wasn't there. So at the end of the day, what I would say is, I was just continuing my research program, and the things that I had invented were still plugging along, and I still had a few publications here and there. But most of my efforts had switched actually into what I would say is more of a mentoring advising position to faculty, again, to start companies and take them out. And so I've had a variety of those that have been, either moderately successful. None of them are have completely folded up yet. But again, it's not you can't go into this thinking your company is going to be a failure, even though the data would say your company is going to be a failure. So, but I enjoy working with people that are excited and want to see their research continue. And so I kind of like to say, if you think if your idea has value, and most of my value is based on, is it going to help people in some kind of way? You really have to view that as an extension of your research program. That it's the next step that you can't do in the university, which is we can't manufacture a product. We can't do pharmacology and toxicology testing to FDA standards. In some instances, we can't help totally with medicinal chemistry for a drug, let's say. We can't totally prototype a medical device. We don't know the regulatory pathways. We don't have people. It's not quite true. A lot of the parts of what I'm talking about are available in the university. So the clinical trial research center, for instance, CTRC, that's funded by the CTSA grant to the Colorado Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. Now that I can read that behind Kathy, they do have experts that can help with filing investigational new drug applications, and probably could file with some medical device applications. So it's there, but it's not. It's more again from a sponsor side, not necessarily from the faculty side. So I think that to me is what I kind of did. I guess that if I were to say, if I'm still, you'll notice, an associate professor, and that is because I'm not sure I meet the criteria to go up to a full professor at some level until I convince everybody that the mentoring piece is important. But I think that's what I would like to do, at least, is I'd like to be that office that people come to when they want to see if they've got an idea that has some commercial potential. So we're working on getting there, but it'll be another couple of years probably.
Yeah. So it sounds like you. It's really interesting. Your response is interesting because you aren't like putting something in a box and saying this is academic only, this is business only, and instead it sounds to me like each one feeds the other, and you kind of go back and forth. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that sort of bench to clinic, all within the confines of the university setting, is kind of like where I would like to see things happen. I would like everybody kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. So whether it's your department head or CU Innovations or your lab, that we're all thinking that developing a product that could benefit mankind is a good idea, and that it's not going to be traditional. The funding's going to be weird. The publications, once you get into clinical development, publications drop off pretty quickly. So grants drop off pretty quickly. I mean, you have to be focused 100% on the product. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be by definition non-traditional. Mm-hmm. Our university, we always have to remember, and as much as I think as faculty don't like the idea that these indirect costs disappear into a big black hole, the reality is that the university takes those indirect costs very seriously. And when you go to a company and you start to do research at the company, the university may view that as, well, they don't get any of that indirect costs. Your company now gets that. So I think we all have to agree this is a good idea, and then kind of head towards the goal. It doesn't take, one major product you know, if you can control it long enough, becomes a significant amount of money for the university. Okay, but at the end of the day, I think what we all have to keep in mind is Stanford at the peak of the Boyer patent was making about $50 million a year in royalties. Okay, that was against a budget of $2 billion. So even that $50 million, when viewed on that $2 billion background, is not a big number.
Right.
So, you know, that I think is where our, you know, we work as, you know, all faculty are kind of independent contractors at some level. They work within the university, but they have to fund their salary as well as typically the people that work for them, as well as their research dollars. And the university provides the box that we all live in. But at the end of the day, that box that we live in costs a bunch of money. And not all, you know, we're not all going to be funded all at this, you know, some people are going to be between gaps. I mean, so keeping an enterprise going like that does, you know, requires that overhead. But once you're in the company, that the university may not take such a great view of that just because the money is going in a different direction and your focus is going in a different direction. So we have to find that. Some universities have developed an innovation track. So part of the work that we're doing with the NCI is trying to gather the information around how many universities have that, how do they actually operate on that. And I think what you'll find is all that really means is that things like patents at some level are treated like a publication, even though the reality is they may or may not go anywhere. So just because you have a patent doesn't mean it turns into a product. The numbers for patents is probably even worse. It's not 1 in 10, it's 1 in 1,000. So, but the, you know, that's kind of where we, you know, I think we have to do, we all have to row the boat together and we have to decide that we want to continue with the mission of the university, which is to, you know, better human health.
Right. So I'm going to switch gears just for a second. And just thinking about the companies that you've started and been engaged with all these years, of all these various companies, which one was the most challenging and why was it challenging?
Oh, I think they're all challenging, you know, for different reasons. When we started Globimune, we met with Larry Gold, who is a very successful entrepreneur from Boulder. And, you know, the first thing that Larry did with us, there were 3 of us, you know, we were all friends at the time, really pretty close friends at the time. And the first thing he said to us, are you guys friends? Because he said, at the end of this process, you may or may not talk to one another. And at some level, sadly, that was true. There is a lot of conflict in all of these companies. They are all, they're just different. With Globimune, it was like, you know, we had 3 guys that were, you know, credible scientists, all trying to fit into basically what was going to be one position, which was the chief scientific officer. You know, and of course, I probably viewed myself as that person, but at the end of the day, I wasn't that person. You know, the CEO really felt like I had more potential on the commercial side to learn. That created quite a bit of conflict just between the, you know, myself and the company. And, you know, the ideas that I had were very different as a, you know, president and CFO than they would have been as a CSO. Other companies, I mean, we had incredibly frustrating things happen. A guy by the name of Dan Abrams, I helped him start a company that was originally called Sierra Neuropharmaceuticals, which was delivering drugs directly to the brain. That company was funded, really, really interesting idea. As it turned out, nobody does that. Nobody knew very much about pharmacology of drugs in the brain or metabolism at the time. He had some really interesting ideas that he wanted to test. Managed to get the company funded by a venture capital group for $21 million. 2008 hit, the venture capital guys pulled up essentially all the money out of his company, not for any particular reason at all. They just stopped funding it. And he literally took another 10 years to finally turn that company around. He went to Australia, and the reason is Australia, they have a tax credit system where they will fund you, and then the money, basically you use the money actually to do research in Australia. And so he was able to get his phase 1 clinical trial actually done in Australia for much less than it would have cost. And then he recently was able to raise $35 million. but to lose 10 years, because of the 2008, that's probably the most frustrating one that I was involved in. Similar experience with other companies. So it was, I would say they're all challenging. Raising capital is challenging. We can get companies started with maybe, close to $3 million in grant funding.
Yeah.
And that's great. But I mean, keeps me awake at night about where's the next 5 million going to come from.
Exactly.
So that's, kind of what we have to do.
Yeah. So we have a really interesting question from Stephen. With respect to drug development, the university does not support core facilities capable of chemical synthesis. Also, capabilities for pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic are spread between different entities, and the core supported by the Cancer Center isn't even at the university. What needs to be done to convince the Anschutz campus that core facilities need consistent central support?
All right. Dr. Nordine asks a very informed question there. So no university has maybe figured out how to do that right yet. I think, quite honestly, what it would take is successes and doing a better job about highlighting successes. Okay. We have, and I don't know what the number actually is, but I'm going to say the University of Colorado has had 4 to 5 drugs approved. And I would challenge most of the audience to tell me what those drugs are. We have not done a very good job of advertising the ones that we have gotten approved. And I think that's something that I think the current, the chancellor's office at least understands what the gap is. If you look at the Cancer Center grant and you look at the CCTSI grant and you look at reviewers' comments, you will typically see comments about not enough bench to clinic. And Steve, you're absolutely right. We don't have the tools to do that. So the only way that we can, in fact, do it is to get an SBIR grant or some other grant that will pay an outside entity to do that work. So the challenge is at CID4, we gave $1 million to the university to start a high throughput screening facility. The deans, so that was $750,000 for the equipment and $250,000 for the first year for personnel. The dean's question to me was, what's going to happen in years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And I said to him, well, you have to do this. This is what you have to do. If you want to take things from the bench to the clinic, you have to have facilities that will help people take things from the bench to the clinic. And that includes pharmacology, toxicology. We can't do that. We just can't. And he's absolutely right. I mean, the Cancer Center is one guy up in Colorado State University, and everybody uses him on their grants. And quite frankly, I'm not sure he can really get everything done on the budget that he has. So I don't know how you do it. I mean, when I look at the university, I say, why can't we be a pharmaceutical company? And that's because that's not our business. Our business is not, it's not defined. Nowhere in any of the mission statements does it say we're going to run our operations like a company and develop drugs. It doesn't say that. It says we're going to do basic research that's going to help man, and we're going to provide clinical services to people in need. But it doesn't really, that line is not provided for. The A to B is not there. It's getting much better though. Steve, you've been here long as I have. Things are slowly improving, but I think it's very complicated unless you get one very large super donor that wants to do this. Okay, like Terry Fox has done it at Vanderbilt with Michael J. Fox has done it at Vanderbilt to set up that. But most of them, Blavatnik, other places, these are $100 million donors only for creating the program and structure. So a lot of that, Blavatnik doesn't really build buildings necessarily. They actually provide programmatic support, and that's what you probably need. Or the pharma companies, who are looking more at universities for their pipeline. They may provide that engine eventually, but I think right now it's, you probably need a big philanthropic donor.
Well, and it's also interesting to me, I'm sitting in Bioscience 3 right now, and I saw the little sign on the door, groundbreaking Bioscience 5. I don't know where 4 is, but I know we're groundbreaking 5, right? So I'm starting to see this bioscience park it's beginning to be something, right?
Yes.
So how do you see that in relationship to Anschutz or to our scientific researchers at CU? What do you see
So,
on the entrepreneurial side?
again, I think a problem with parks is they start off in a philanthropic mode. And that is, we're going to support the faculty. So my company, Global Immune, at some point or the other, we occupied about half of Bioscience One, but we were like one of the first tenants. And when you were a first tenant over there, they had access to laboratory equipment that had been left over from the Army. And at the time, the building was mostly vacant.
Mhm.
So we were able to pretty rapidly expand. Once we got funding, we were able to expand. And the challenge, I think, over time is right now we don't have any space over there.
Mhm.
So the three companies, the three spin-out companies that I'm working with right now are challenged in terms of finding not only laboratory space, but even office space over there. And I think it is extremely critical, that they be near the campus. I mean, yes, I can find them office space somewhere else. I could find them laboratory space somewhere else, but it's really hard. Having done that myself, we had my company, actually, we couldn't do it in the university. We can't rent space in the university. So our company started down at Eleanor Roosevelt Institute for Cancer Research because they rented space to people. But that was, only 2 miles away from the 9th Avenue campus. When we moved out to Fitzsimmons, now we were suddenly, 20 miles, from campus. And that wasn't a lot of fun going back and forth. So, we need to figure out what that's going to look like. But at the same time, they have to come up with the money to build the buildings. And that means they have to have long-term tenants. If we get a company off the ground, they might have funding for 3 years to operate, and they may not have anything. So what we're working on, I think you'll see, is we are going to create some common shared space over there, including laboratory space. And whether that's in I don't think it will be in Bioscience 5, because I can't remember what Bioscience 5 is already committed to something. I don't know whatever happened to 4. But 3 right at the moment, if you want to move into 3, you have to pay to build out the space. And that's in 5,000 square foot blocks, I believe. And 5,000 square feet of laboratory space at $1,000 a square foot is going to cost you quite a lot of money. So that's $5 million just to go into bricks and mortar. So it's a bit of a challenge if you don't have a company that's making money automatically to move into places like that. But everybody's aware of the critical need for that. And again, it's part of this rowing the boat. Everybody's got to take some risk here.
Yeah.
And again, I think, to me, a bigger philanthropic engine, and I'm not saying we don't have a big philanthropic engine, but that's probably what it takes, is just, hey guys, we can do this, and one drug really makes a big difference. I mean, if we could get one drug approved and capture a lot of the royalty on that, that's a significant amount of money that would feed back into the program. And I think everybody's aware of that. I just don't think, in the past, we didn't have any ability to advertise that particularly well. But I think, I would say right now, the CU Innovations, the Chancellor's Office, is pretty supportive of us being competitive in this area.
I think that's really true. So Eric has a question that's exactly the question I would love to end today on, which is, what's a piece of advice that you wish someone had given to you before you first started founding biotech startups? That's a great question.
Well, in my case, it would have been stay at Janus Capital and do casinos. But I think at the time, if I were to look back at what I missed in some ways, was not working at a large pharmaceutical company. If I had a lot of people tell me, you should really just go work at a large pharmaceutical company. You should go work at a large biotech company. And that's probably, it wasn't such bad advice. I don't know. We didn't, I don't think you can be entrepreneurial and give a whole lot of thought about what is going on. It's not something you really plan for unless you've done it before and you know what the pitfalls are and you know what's going to happen. The big challenge is capital. You just cannot underestimate how much capital you have to raise. And what you have to remember is that failure plays into that a little bit. And so as a first-time entrepreneur, no matter how smart you are, unless you went to college with somebody that's become a venture capital guy, it's not so easy to raise that kind of capital. And so when you look at people on campus, a couple of them, not all examples, but Mike Bristow, he went to school with a guy that was head of a very large venture capital fund. They went to medical school together, and that certainly helped him. So you need to network as best as you can, interact with the local community, Colorado Bioscience Association, et cetera. Just take advantage of any programs that they have. They have more programs than we do at Spark and Reach. You need to take advantage of Kathy Bodine and her program with the I-Corps, because that's a critical thing that I didn't, if I were to say one piece of advice, and I hated I-Corps to begin with, but understanding who the customer is. They're really somebody that's interested. I'm a cancer guy, well, everybody's interested in new cancer drug, right? And the answer is, wow, a lot of times they're not really actually interested in new cancer drug, or at least not your cancer drug. So I can't say I have really great, some piece of advice I missed. It would probably have been not to do this, but it's been fun, but it's also been a challenge. And that's just kind of the way that it is.
Well, thank you, Rick, so very, very much for being here today. For our audience, I want to remind you, this Ask the Expert series is a collaboration with some wonderful partners. We have not only our team from the Colorado Clinical Translational Sciences Institute, but we're also partnering with CSU, and they offer a program called Research to Market. So our friends up at CSU and our good friends at the University of Colorado Boulder, which is Venture Partners, which is the CU Boulder Entrepreneurial Education and Training. And they also do a Research to Market. The point of this is that all of us have access to all of these resources. And so we are all working together to bring you as much information and support as we can. So check in with us again next month. We'll be back with another expert. And Rick, thank you so very much today.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy, and thank you for all of you listening to that diatribe. But at the end of the day, I mean, I was able to do it. I can guarantee any of you are able to do it. It's exciting. My goal is to get a drug approved. I've taken 8 things into the clinic so far, and none of them been approved. So still got a couple to do, and we'll see. But I think if you have the desire to do it, you'll figure out how to do it, regardless of whether we help or don't help. But I think we're in a better position now than we've ever been to kind of help support this, and hopefully we'll get some better mechanisms in on the startup side.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.